So good evening, everyone. And tonight we continue with the exciting saga of Ruth, as we move into a new chapter where Naomi is telling her what to do so that she can find a place to be. Okay, now remember where we left our protagonist, right? We said Ruth had come back and she tells Naomi about how Boaz has been super kind to her. And Ruth tells her, listen, Boaz is one of our redeemers. He's of our redeemers. He's one of our redeemers. And this is great. You can, she's like, the man here, I'll just read the English, the man's related to us. He's one of our redeeming kinsmen. Migo aleinu. All right. And then Ruth says, oh, he said I can stay working with his mates, with his like girls until the harvest is finished. And she's like, okay, you do that. And she apparently does that through the harvest, because now we join our protagonist at the end of the harvest. Okay. So here we are now beginning chapter 3, Pelek Gimel. And Vatomer la Naomi chamota, biti halo avakesh lach manoach asher yitav lach. So Naomi, her mother-in-law, says to her, and it's so, this is why we don't realize when we're reading it or hearing it, that meanwhile the whole harvest is past, because it's as if the conversation is continuing. It doesn't say Naomi said to Ruth, it says Naomi said to her, right? As if it's just a continuation of the conversation. My daughter, I'm seeking a place of rest for you, a home for you that will be good for you. Now, this is where Naomi is going to tell Ruth what to do. Just in terms of the switch, Naomi came, the two of them came back to the land where with Naomi completely hopeless. And so Ruth says, hey, I'm gonna go and get us food. And that's what Ruth does. But once Ruth comes back and Naomi says, wait a second, she just happened to get to Boaz's field and Boaz was kind to her, and Naomi starts seeing this hope. She's taking the reins and she says, listen, Ruth, I am going to find a place. My concern now is that you have a home, okay? Because and the understanding is Ruth has been very, very kind to her, but Naomi also cares about Ruth and what's going to be good for her. She's like, look, I'm going to find a home for you now, okay? Because this is now a possibility. V'ata halo Boaz modatanu asher hayit et narotav hinehu zoreh et goran asorim halayla. Okay. Now our Boaz are our kinsmen, right? Who you were working together with his young women who, in the fields. Tonight he is going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Now this is the end of both the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. So why are those coinciding? So first of all, in the area of Bethlehem, they actually do coincide fairly. I'm basing myself on Zakovitz here, that they actually do correspond pretty closely, the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. And also you would be winnowing the barley. You would be winnowing the barley after you've given the barley a chance to dry, whereas you're harvesting the wheat before it dries out so it doesn't go bad. So that's why normally the wheat harvest would be after. They end up being kind of close together. You would be winnowing the barley after the wheat harvest, just because because you have to have the barley has to dry out. So he's winnowing the barley, and Naomi now is going to know. She's like, tonight's the night. She's figured it out, right? She's like, tonight's the night. Tonight's the night he's going to be on the field. The harvest is over. There's not going to be a normal way for Ruth to meet Boaz anymore. Okay, so, and this is the night that she knows exactly where Boaz is going to be, and he's going to be in a place that is super accessible for Ruth. Okay, so she's like, he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. Now this sounds very suggestive. You should wash you should anoint yourself with oil, you should put your dress on, right? And then you should go down to the threshing floor. Don't let anyone know no one should see you until he's finished eating and drinking. Okay, so she's going to do this in secret. Now, this is already very suggestive. It seems it's supposed to be suggestive. It's more suggestive to us than it necessarily has to be, because normally when you say, oh, she's supposed to be anointing herself, she's washing and she's anointing herself with oil, and this is clearly something sexual, it doesn't really have to be sexual per se. And that's why I brought here a verse from Shmuel Bet Yud Bet, 2 Samuel chapter 12. Okay, and this is after, if you remember, when David's being punished for Bathsheba. So the baby is, so he prays that the baby will live, and the baby doesn't, the baby dies. And right after they say, okay, the baby's dead, he says, is the baby dead? And he's like, they're like, is the child dead? And they say, yes. And it says, and he got up from the ground, he was sitting from the ground, like praying and kind of in mourning, and he bathed and he anointed himself with oil, and he changed his clothes. And then he goes to the temple, the house of the Lord, or it would have to be the tabernacle. The temple isn't built yet, right? So it would have to be the tabernacle, the Mishkan, right? And he goes and he bows down, and then he comes. And then he goes, it's this way he prays, and then he goes to his house and then he eats. And the thing is, they're like, what do you mean? Now that the child is dead, you're out of mourning? He's like, well, before the child died, because it was before the child died, I was begging for God to maybe have mercy. Now that the child's dead, there's nothing to do anymore, is David's response. But the idea is, the reason I brought it here is because we see the same actions. He washes, he anoints himself with oil, and he puts his clothing on. It's the same words. Like, he puts his dress on, right? And the idea there is simply that he made himself presentable and also ready to go to the house of God, right? Here, she's making herself more than presentable. One assumes she's making herself, one assumes pretty, but the idea is she is preparing herself to go to Boaz, okay? So that's what she needs to do. And again, we're going to get more suggestive as the story goes on. And this is Naomi telling Ruth exactly what to do. Okay. V'hi b'shachvo, v'yadat et hamakom asher yishkav sham, uvat v'gilit margalotav v'shachaft, v'hu yagid lach et asher tasim. What are you going to do? Yours being hidden until he finishes eating and drinking. Okay. And then when he lies down, because you're hidden, you will know exactly where he laid down, because he's not completely alone, obviously. There are young men working with him. So they're all going to be lying down in different places. You wait to see exactly where he lies down. You go then, you uncover his feet, and you lie down. And then he will tell you what you should do. Okay. Now, at this point, Naomi at this point is giving her over to Boaz. She's like, do what I'm telling you until he tells you. And it's very, very clear that it's probably not like, there's no place where toes are used for a stand-in for other parts. So it probably does mean feet, right? She should uncover his feet. However, the symbolism is pretty clear, right? So she should uncover his feet, and she should lie down next, and she should lie there, right? And she should just lie there and wait for him to tell her what to do. Okay. So it's very clear that now we're just going to be placing herself with Boaz's mercy. What's going to happen, we don't know yet. Okay. And so she replied, I will do everything that you tell me, I will do. And in fact, that's what she does. She goes to the threshing floor and she does everything that her mother-in-law commanded her to do. And Boaz eats and he drinks, so he's happy, right? You're happy after you eat and you drink. Clearly he's drinking wine, but he's not drinking to drunkenness, but still, he's in a good mood, right? Which is probably according to Naomi's plan. This is a good time to approach someone and say, hey, won't you marry me, right? And he came to sleep at the edge of the grain pile. In other words, Ruth is looking and she's seeing exactly where he's going to sleep, right? So that's what she's supposed to do. She's looking, she sees he's sleeping exactly there. Vatavot balat, and she goes in secret, like and she goes in secret, or it's stealthily is a good translation here. But tigal margalotav batishkav, right? And she uncovered his feet and she lies down. Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, vayecharad ha'ish vayilafet. And it was in the middle of the night. We have a few things that happen in this way. And behold, it was in the middle of the night. Always supposed to be a surprise. That's why we have that great song for the Seder at the end of the Seder when we say that it was in the middle of the night, and we say all the things in the biblical things that were suddenly in the middle of the night. Okay, suddenly in the middle of the night, right? He startles and he twists. Apparently means, and he like kind of twists in surprise. And behold, there is a woman who's lying by his feet. Now, this is an interesting use in, I learned this from a linguist once. Hine, the word hine is an example of a deictic particle, that it's something that it gives you a shift in perspective. It tells you where you are, when you are, and where you're looking from. So hine, and behold, there is a woman. We are switching now to Boaz's point of view. He doesn't know who Ruth is. Why is he so surprised? Because he wakes up and there's a woman next to his feet. What the heck, right? Vayomer miyad, and he says, "Who are you?" Vatomer anochi Ruth amatecha. She says, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Ufarasta knafecha al hamatcha ki goelata." And may you spread your robe, in other words, spread your sponsorship over your maidservant because you are a redeemer. Okay, so and there's a clear parallel here to what Boaz said earlier to Ruth when he talks about God, asher bat lachasot tachat knafav, that you came to take shelter under his wings. And she's saying to Boaz, now I am your handmaid Ruth. I am ufarasa knafecha, and you should spread your wings here, meaning kind of like your robe, but your wings over your maidservant. Now, Boaz, it's time for you to take care of me, right? Because you are a redeemer. Vayomer brucha at laHashem biti, and he said, may be blessed to the Lord, my daughter. And this is very interesting because, like, he doesn't react saying, "What in the world are you talking about? What are you doing? You don't sneak down in the middle of the night and scare a guy this way." That's not what he's saying. He's saying, "You are Ruth. I thought you were amazing before, and now you just proved it." He says, "You are blessed to God. Your kindness, your latest kindness is greater than your first. Not to go with the young men, whether poor or rich." And what there are certain things that are implied here. So first of all, now we understand that Boaz is old. We didn't know that necessarily, but it certainly sounds that way. That's what he's saying. You didn't go after the young men. You came to me, right? It also does sound like whether this is true or not, he's certainly implying that she had choices. Like, there's no reason to think that she couldn't have gotten some other man. Whereas Ruth has been acting like that isn't an option for her. Like, she has been very kind of like, what I need to do is make sure that my mother-in-law and I have food. Like that's my goal here. And what's interesting here also is there's very much on both sides, and actually Yair Zakovich writes about this very nicely. On both sides, there's kind of an absolute ignoring of beauty, right? It doesn't say ever that Ruth is pretty, which the Bible absolutely knows how to do, right? There's no indication that Ruth thinks of herself as particularly pretty. There's no indication of Boaz he says he's a gibor chayil. So you don't know, like, what does that mean exactly? He is an important, a very worthy man. Does that mean, like, what exactly does that mean? But it seems he's older, right? And both of them are doing what they're supposed to be doing. When Boaz recognizes her, what he recognizes is her her special qualities and what she's done, right? And then she says, oh, you recognize, you know me, you recognize this in me, and you recognize me as a person, right? And what she's recognizing in him is he's a redeemer, and he's someone who's already been very kind to her. And this is what is being emphasized. And he's saying, wow, you're so amazing that now you haven't gone after the young men. V'tabiti al tiri kol asher tomri e'eselach ki yodea kol shar ami ki eshet chayil. And now, my daughter, do not fear. Everything you say, I will do. Note the reversal here, right? So Naomi says to Ruth, do what I tell you. And then she says, and do what Boaz tells you. And now Boaz says, Ruth, you are so fantastic. Anything you do, I will do. Why? Anything you say, rather, I will do. Because everyone knows, the whole gate of my people knows, the whole city knows that you are a woman of valor. And again, that is parallel to the fact that Boaz is called a gibor chayil. He's called a mighty man of valor, right? So we the readers or the listeners know, oh, they're a real match, because this is how Boaz was introduced to us. And now we know that Ruth is his match, right? In that valor, in that quality, right? Now, where else do we see Eshet Chayil? We, of course, all know this term, woman of valor, from the closing chapter of Proverbs, which describes a woman of valor. The other place we have a woman of valor is also in Proverbs, is Mishlei Yud Bet Dalet, is in Proverbs 12:4, it should be 12:4, yes. Eshet Chayil ateret ba'ala u'charavkav ba'atzmotav mivisha, that a good wife, a capable wife, a woman of valor, I prefer the translation of woman of valor, frankly, is a crown for her husband, and a bad wife essentially is like rot in his bones. But the main explanation of what a woman of valor is, what an Eshet Chayil is of course, again, Mishlei Lamed Aleph, Proverbs 31, Eshet Chayil meaning himself, who will find a woman of valor, that her price is far beyond rubies or pearls, as it's usually translated, because pnimim, now you really use it for pearls. But the idea of, if you read that chapter, this woman is a tremendously capable woman. She leads the household. She takes care of everyone. And she also is kind of a merchant in her. She deals with merchants. So she's a tremendously capable woman and takes care of everything and everyone in her household. No one in her household is lacking. And that certainly is an aspect of Ruth, who made sure, who did whatever she needed to do to take care of Naomi when Naomi was sitting at home hopeless, right? And she also behaves properly in every respect. So he says, the whole town now knows this. Why? Because everyone's been talking about how Naomi came back with Ruth, and how Ruth has been taking care of her and has not been running after the young men. However, there's a problem. V'ataki omnam ki goel anochi v'gam yesh goel karov mimeni. But okay, yes, you're right. I am a redeemer, but there is a closer redeemer. There's someone who has a closer kinship to Naomi and therefore to you. Okay, and so I can't just go ahead and marry you right away. All right, I can't just go ahead and do what I want, and what you want, which seems to be for me to marry you. So what is he talking about? And the parallel here, and we're going to talk in next week's class, we're going to go into the detail of what is the geula, the redemption, and the yibum. Like, what we're reading here in Ruth, and especially what we'll see in the next chapter, does not at all match the biblical laws of redemption and yibum. And it also doesn't match, for example, the redemption by Yirmiyahu of Hananiah's field. So we're going to look at that next week in more depth. But what's clear here is what we're looking at here, and I'm looking at Vayikra Chavhei, Leviticus 25. It's not Chavhei 25. Okay, when your brethren is in distress, and here it seems to really be talking about your relative, and that's, we know that just because of the continuation of the verse. When your relative is in distress and he sold from his portion, from his holdings, right? And the redeemer who is close to him shall come, and possibly what means is who is the closest to him, okay, will come and will redeem what his brother has sold. Okay, so the idea is that if you're in a situation, and I'm actually going to be talking about that a little bit this week on Shabbat, anyone who can make it to show for it'll be in Hebrew, but I'll be talking about that a little bit. But the idea here is that especially farmers who would fall on difficult years, they'd have to sell off parts of their land to in order just to get the seeds for the next year's crops. And if they're forced to do that, they're essentially, a lot of them getting to a point where they can never buy it back, because the next year they'll just have to sell more of it to get, they're never going to earn enough to buy it back. So the idea is you, the closest relative, should purchase it. And it's not clear, is it you purchase it and you keep it and then it's yours? Are you supposed to actually help find a way to get it back to them? Or maybe you have an arrangement with them for them to kind of pay you off slowly so they can get that land back? Or is the idea just that it stays in a larger family? But the idea is that if the closest relative is supposed to redeem it, that is what we see with Yirmiyahu, with Jeremiah, when his cousin comes and says, I need to sell a field, you should buy it. Again, that's not exactly the same, because in this case, he's already sold it. In the story with Jeremiah, he said, I have to sell it, or I want to sell it, you need to buy it from me, right? Which is a weird situation, because Jerusalem's already under siege, and who the heck would want this field? God tells Jeremiah, buy it, and Jeremiah's like, I don't understand, right? So that becomes a kind of a basis for an understanding of what is the prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem mean long term, and is there going to be redemption eventually, right? But here what we see is that there's an idea that the closest relative should redeem the land. All right, and that's what's going on here, talking about Ruth's marriage, which is not what we have in the biblical passage. It's not talking about a marriage, it's talking about land. We only find out about the land in the next chapter, that this is somehow linked to the land, to the land. So let's continue. So he says, there's someone who's more closer. Lini halayla vayava boker imi galech toviga v'imlo yachpotz legalech ugaltich anochi chai Adonai shechvi ad haboker. Okay, so what does he say? So sleep here tonight, because you don't want to send her going home in the middle of the night. It's not safe, right? It's never safe for anyone to travel at night ever. Okay, it's a standard thing. And in the morning, if he redeems you, so that's good that he's redeeming you. That's a good thing. And if he doesn't want to redeem you, I will redeem you by God. Like he's swearing. I swear I'm going to redeem you. Okay, sleep till morning. So you know, Ruth, what he's saying to her is, you're taken care of. I promise you're taken care of. If this guy wants to redeem you, great. That's the proper thing. That's fine. If he doesn't want to redeem you, I promise you, I will redeem you. You are taken care of. You are set. Okay, so now you can sleep till morning. But and this shows now all of the. Actually, I'll finish this verse and I'll talk. But so she slept by his feet until morning. And she got up before anyone would recognize his fellow. In other words, she got up when there was a little bit of light, but it was early before anyone could recognize her. So no one would say, "Oh, I saw Ruth going home," right? Vayomer al yivada ki ba'a ha'isha hagoren. And he said to himself, Boaz said to himself, so that no one should know that this woman came to the threshing floor. what's interesting here is she's acting and he's thinking, right? In other words, they're so in tune that she does this and he's thinking this is the reason that she should do it, and they're that in tune, right? But let's talk a little bit about the seed. He tells her, sleep here tonight, okay? And sleep here tonight, and I'm not going to touch you, right? Because I have no rights here. There's a Redeemer who's closer, all right? And she sleeps. She could just go a little way away and sleep. No, she sleeps next to his feet. She's like, this is my guy. And there's a lot of control in this chapter, okay? Here he is a man, here's a young woman, she's sleeping next to his feet. He doesn't touch her all night. He's like, I am not touching you, right? Because I have no rights here. He doesn't touch her all night. She sleeps next to his feet. And she waited for him to wake up. She went to lie next to him. She didn't wake him up and say, hey, here I am. She lay next to him to begin with. She didn't know he was going to wake up in the middle of the night. What if he slept through the night? In the morning, she's there and everyone sees her, right? There's a lot of restraint in this chapter because they are both acting correctly in this situation with heightened sexual tension that you are supposed to see. Right? She prepared herself before going down to the field. She uncovered his feet. She lay down next to them. There's all this kind of sexual tension underneath, but none of it's going to be acted on because these people are acting the right way. She's acting correctly. He's acting correctly. At the same time, while there's no emotions no one has actually said, oh, I choose you as like, it's all very below the surface. They're both doing things that hint to the fact that this is my person, right? So he's saying, look, there's someone closer if he wants you, but if he doesn't want you, I am here. I'm here, I promise. I am marrying you. And she doesn't have to lie next to his feet. She still is like, I want you. I want you to spread your cloak over me. She's still lying next to his feet when he says, sleep here tonight. And both of them in this restrained way seem to be showing that they're in sync, right? And they want, you could say, a life together. They want to be linked. Okay. And then, so in the morning, she gets up. It's still dawn. It's before anyone can recognize anyone or really see anything beyond shapes. And he said, okay, bring your it's not a scarf, it seems to be like a shawl, because it has to be something that could hold stuff, right? So bring your shawl and hold it. And she held it. And he gave her 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her. He put it like in the shawl, and then he went to town. In other words, he went to town. He's got to deal with this, okay? But she can't go with him because people can't see that she stayed the night with him in the threshing floor. So this is his first gift to her, because before, when he was making sure that she was taken care of, that she was fed, and that she had grain to bring home, it was all kind of what did he do? He was like, okay, you know what? Forget stuff. Leave stuff. Let her glean in between. Let her, and then he was like, oh, here, and giving her lots of food to eat for lunch, right? And she had left over so she could take it to her mother-in-law. This is the first time he's like, here's a gift. And this is also a recognition of what we both want. What I want is to actually take you under my wing. That is what I want. I'm giving you now food straight out, right? Without any sort of pretense. So then he goes back to town. He goes to town. That's what I'm saying. Here, when she got back to town, because I don't know why they decided this is a mistake. But Vayavo Ha'ir is, and he went to town, and that's what makes sense in this case. He went to town. She's not going to town. She's going to her mother, right? Vatavo el chamota, and when she came to her mother-in-law, but Tomer mi'at biti, and she said, so this is saying, how is it with you, daughter? She's literally, it's who are you, my daughter, right? I do like the idea of reading it, who are you, my daughter? Because if he has kind of married her, quote unquote, then she's now his wife. Like she's someone else now, right? Who are you, my daughter? And she told her everything the man did with her. So she told her the whole story. So now Naomi knows what the story is. And she said, these 6 measures of barley he gave me because he said, so you should not come empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now it's very sweet because we're not sure if he said this or not, right? Maybe he said it, right? He just gave her the barley, but she's putting Naomi back in the middle of the story, right? The whole scene was a scene between Ruth and Boaz. And she's saying to him, no, we were thinking of you. We were thinking of you. He gave this to me. He wanted me to bring this to you, right? We didn't forget you, right? So I think that's a very kind of a nice addition here. Vatomer shvi biti ad asher ted'in ech yipol davar ki lo yishkot ha'ish ki im kila hadavar hayom. And she said, okay, sit here, my daughter, until you know how the thing's going to turn out, because this man is not going to rest until this thing is finished today. And that's interesting. You're like, how does Naomi know that? And Naomi is like, she's like, okay, I heard your whole story. I heard what you said. And he said, I am telling you, this guy is not stopping until you're taken care of. I can hear it from the story. This guy is not going to stop until this is done. I see we have a little bit more time. Let me see if I'm going to pause. I'm just going to continue this to the next. So then what happens, this flows right into the next chapter. Uvaz Allah hashar, vayashem sham, v'hinei hagoel over asher diber Boaz, vayomer surah shva po ploni almoni, vayasar vayeshed. And Boaz went up to the gate. The gate is where judgments happen, and so it's where law is decided. Excuse me, I'll take care of the sound here. Okay, say that again. So Boaz went up to the sha'ar, the gate. The gate is where everyone sits in judgment in an Israelite town. It's where judgment happens. So this is where, and this is kind of the public square. So, right, so this is going to happen in front of everyone. This is going to be the judgment. And he sat there, and the Redeemer, this is the close Redeemer. We know that there's the closest Redeemer. The Redeemer is passing. The one that Boaz spoke of, Asher Diber Boaz, the one that Boaz spoke of. Vayomer surah shva po ploni almoni. He says, okay, so you'll come over here. You'll come over, and he says, and he comes over and he sits down, right? And then he takes 10 elders and says, now we're going to have the judgment. We're going to take care of this. We're going to take care of this again in the public square, so everyone knows the status, and they know that we did everything right. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and take questions. Okay, so Danny and Libby say there's no indication anywhere whether Boaz is already married. Right, there is no indication anywhere whether Boaz is already married. One assumes he's old, so one assumes that he has been married. He may be widowed, he may not be widowed. It doesn't come up, and it's going to come up. We're going to mention this again when our buddy Ploni Almoni, our so-and Mr. etc. He says, he gives a kind of a very vague reason for not marrying Ruth, right? Well, if we're not being able to marry Ruth, which has been interpreted in that, like, oh, I already have a wife and sons already. But there's a nastier interpretation as well, which we're going to talk about, which actually makes a little bit more sense in terms of plain meaning of the text. So there's no indication, and no one seems to care. It's not an issue at all. And also Abigail is also referred to in the Midrash as Neshet Chayash. I don't think, let me see what she's actually, what Abigail is called.
I don't believe that.
I don't think it's
in the Mikra. I think it's in the Midrash.
In the Midrash, you're gonna have everyone's gonna be called Neshet Chayash.
Yeah, well,
Um,
what I'm bringing up is rather far-fetched, but it strikes me that the term Eshet
so,
Chayil is
so,
used.
so
It
Abigail is
appears
called Tovat Sechel Vifat Mar'eh, right? She's
right.
called someone who's smart and pretty, which isn't bad. It's not bad.
I know there's a Hasidic niggin of Avigail Eshet Chayil.
Oh yeah, because it does.
Yeah, well, but the reason I'm bringing it up is it appears that the term Eshet Chayil seems to appear mostly in the context of David and Shlomo, and I know speaking here from a 21st century perspective, but neither David or Shlomo are what you'd call a Jewish feminist dream. They both had rather problematic relations with women, and yet it seems that the women in their context, and and Ruth, of course, is an ancestor to David. They are referred to Eshet Chayil. I wonder if there's any kind of significance to that.
Well, I think that's an interesting idea that because you have Ruth as being the woman that David's descended from, you would have the Midrash more likely to use that for his wives. I think that I don't know. I think Eshet Chayil becomes such a standard term for the most praiseworthy woman and the most praiseworthy wife. It becomes a phrase that's used for this is a good wife. And Abigail has a particular status of being a good wife because she's married when she meets David and she saves her dreck of a husband's life through her wisdom and her ability to negotiate, right? And her ability to calm David down because David is ready to kill, right? And she calms him down with her very clever wording and clearly with some charisma too. And so she is, and then and then afterwards, when her husband does die, she marries David, and she's, okay, she is that idea of a wife of valor, not just a woman of valor, but a wife of valor, because that becomes very much because of Mishlei, because of Proverbs, that phrase becomes kind of for the perfect wife. I'll just move on to the next question. Moshe Matutias asks, it seems almost like Boaz deliberately ambushed Ploni Almoni. He gave him no warning or advance notice and just pulled him over at the gate and forced him to make a big decision right there on the spot. Yes, it absolutely seems that what Boaz wants is for this guy to kind of turn it down. And that's why he sets it up also where he doesn't give him all the information. Like we haven't read it yet. Because I think we're gonna really dive into that chapter next week. But he really gives him a situation where first he tells him about the field, and he's like, "Okay, you want to redeem the field?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." Oh, well, it comes with a woman. And he's like, whoa, no, hold on just a second, right? So it absolutely seems, on the one hand, it seems like he doesn't particularly want it to. He wants to be on the up and up, but he doesn't want to give the guy any more chances to really work it out. At the same time, he promised Ruth that this would be taken care of, right? And Naomi interprets it as he's going to do this today. He's going to make sure this is taken care of today because he's not going to let any grass grow underneath his feet. So that also is kind of what's being hinted at. He's not going to wait a second. He's going to go right away to town. He's going to right away to the gate. As soon as he sees this guy, he's going to, hey, come over, let's settle this now. Let's settle this now. And then he gathers 10 men. He just works really, really quickly to get this settled. So Edo says, why doesn't Ruth address Boaz in a more standard way? Couldn't she ask him the same question during daytime? No, she couldn't, because she couldn't approach him during daytime. I'll add to that in just a bit. Didn't she take a risk that this brazen method would scare him away or make her look improper? I think the risk is clear. I think we are supposed to see the risk. We are supposed to feel at least a little bit of tension in the story. And I think that really absolutely, that gives us that tension that we haven't had really up until that. Well, we had kind of had it because they're so poor and they're so neat. What's going to happen to Naomi and Ruth is absolutely a question that underlies every chapter, the whole story. But first of all, no, if you are a young woman, you cannot approach an established man in the middle of his field, in the middle of the day and say, marry me. That's clearly what you can't do, actually, because that would be incredibly inappropriate. all right? You as a young woman, recognize, I mean, we frequently forget it. I believe I've said this before, but I realized this once, I realized this because someone said something about the whole story with Reuven's Dudaim, Reuven's mandrakes, right? Where when Rachel is buying them, Rachel is trying to acquire them from Leah, right? And she keeps calling them your son's Dudaim, your son's mandrakes, your son's Dudaim, your son's Dudaim, your son's Dudaim. And I'm like, why does she keep on saying your sons, your sons, your sons? Obviously, part of it is because of the irony that she wants these mandrakes for their fertility powers, and because she doesn't have a son. And the reason Leah has them is because she has a son. In other words, Leah's son brought them to her, and that's what Rachel wants, is a son, and that's why she wants these flowers. So that's absolutely part of it. But another part of it is that, okay, if mandrakes are growing in the field, go get your own mandrakes. Why do you need Reuven's mandrakes? They're growing, go get them. And the answer is no, she can't. She is a married woman who cannot go out into the field. Right? Dina goes out into the field and she gets kidnapped and raped. You don't go out into the field. If you've ever seen the theme of the woman in the window, right? The woman in the window, and women are frequently biblically as well, and in ancient literature, they look out of the window. Why? Because they're in the house. They're in the house. They're in the harem if they're a princess or concubine, or they're in just a regular house, and they're looking out. They don't go outside. They don't go to the field. The reason Leah has mandrakes is because she has a son who goes out into the field, and Rachel doesn't have a son.
Okay, so Ruth could send someone.
Mandrakes, what?
So Ruth could send some messenger. Like, this is just seems like very.
Messenger? What messenger? She's dirt poor. She can't send anyone. That's the whole problem. The whole problem is you've got two women who are completely helpless. They're completely helpless. I want you to, again, this is obviously like but this is the way the story set it up. They're two women who have no close enough relative that would house them, it sounds like. They're two women that come back where they have no one because all their people die, right? And now Ruth goes out to gather grain where there are young men working in the field. She doesn't have water. Right? And Boaz looks at her and said, you're such a great person. Drink the water that we're drying. You don't even have to draw your water. You drink our water, and you can go and clean in this field, and you can stick close to the women. And that's a tremendous boon to her. He's not actually handing her anything. Everything she's doing, she is taking as a pauper. She's a poor person who's doing what poor people do, which is gleaning in the fields among the things that the wealthy people are commanded to leave over for the poor. So she's taking stuff that's left for the poor and taking it home to her mother-in-law. And Boaz is, through his generosity, making her able to collect more than she normally would be able to, and to bring home more than she normally could, so that she'll do well in this season. But she's working hard, and she has the status of a pauper, right? She doesn't have a messenger to send. She's got no one. It's her and her mother-in-law, who's also a woman. So their ability to reach out is extremely limited. And that's why Naomi's like, okay, this is the time. This is a time with no one else around, with no one seeing you. You can do this with Boaz. And you're taking a risk, but Boaz is such a good guy. I know you're going to be okay.
So
and
she
that's
did.
What's going on.
So she did see Boaz in the field outside. She talked to him. She could have told him then or the next day, would you mind stepping aside for a few minutes? Why don't we have a cup of tea or something?
There's one way of reading that initial conversation that she has with Naomi, that when Naomi says he's one of our redeemers, that's actually what Naomi would like her to do. And Ruth's like, whoa, hold on. He said I could bring in grain the whole season. Let me bring in grain the whole season, and then we can talk, right? And you can understand that because if she approached him the first time, it doesn't sound like he necessarily talks to her. It doesn't sound like he talks to her every day. He talks to her initially. So it's very possible that if she approached him right away and he said no, then she couldn't be in the field anymore. Like she wouldn't have this opportunity to collect more grain than she would normally be able to. So she collects grain the entire season of reaping, and now is the time. Now is the last time she can approach Boaz. Right? It's over. She has a time. She has a free space where no one's watching, and at this point also, a lot of this is really contingent on this idea that Naomi knows that Boaz is going to do the right thing. And it's very clear that from Naomi's point of view, she knows Boaz is going to do the right thing. She's like, okay, Ruth, he's going to do the right thing. This is the way to do it. Okay. And note that Boaz had to see from Ruth that she was open to this, because it sounds like Boaz was like, hey, I don't know if she wants to go after some young guy. I can't make a move on this. I can't make a move. And also this whole thing, maybe she doesn't want to go by redemption. Maybe she doesn't want that to choose her husband, right? So you needed both of these things. So it is possible that what Naomi actually was initially saying when she said he's one of our redeemers was kind of hinting to Ruth, hey, maybe you can do something like the next time he approaches you in the field. And Ruth's answer is he said I could gather next to his maidservants the entire season. And then it's only when the season ends that Naomi's like, okay, season's over, now's the time, right? So Danny and Libby asked, where are Naomi and Ruth living during the story? In Elimelech's old house? One assumes in Elimelech's old house, they inherited a field, right? Which we find out in the next chapter that there's actually a field that Naomi owns, right? That's supposed to be redeemed now together with Ruth. So, which it sounds like they simply don't have the manpower, like, oh, well, she has a field, but that's all she has. She doesn't have the manpower to plant it. She doesn't have the seed. She doesn't have the manpower to plant anything. She can't do anything with a field. This is exactly when you sell off your field, right? When you can't do anything with it. So, so there seems to be a field. Someone assumes that there's at least some kind of property that they could move back to, right? And a property, however, that does not include food. Like the main thing they need, it seems like, is food as opposed to shelter. So that seems to be that they have property, but they don't have food. They don't have the wherewithal to get food, and that was their initial need. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so what we're yes.
Naomi and Ruth are poor. They're women. She's also a Moabite, which is going to come up. A Moabite.
I missed your last sentence.
She's also a woman from Moabite, and that's going to come up. I mean, that's another strike against
that comes up. It came up before. What's interesting is it was very prominent in the last chapter. It's going to come up again in the next chapter. In this chapter, it wasn't like a deal, right? It wasn't. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. It's like from Boaz's perspective at this point, that's not an issue, right? Mm-hmm. She's just a fantastic. She's a woman of valor. I mean, yes.
Okay. On that topic, I took a class once at Bar-Ilan on Cinderella stories, and this is very definitely a Cinderella story. And sometimes Cinderella stories are resolved because the man has such high status that it doesn't matter her status, because she gets status from him. I mean, like he can make decisions that someone of lesser status could not do. So I'm saying I think that applies in this story too. Boaz, we'll see next week, has status, and can act.
I think that the story itself, the way it's written, means to leave that a little nebulous. In other words, the fact that he says you could have gone after the young men, whether poor or rich. In other words, there seems to be this, it's at least planting seeds that she actually doesn't need Boaz in order to be part of this. And when that she could have taken, in fact, she didn't need someone that was that high status, and she could have taken someone else. And there are seeds that are being planted. And one of them is, and also he says, everyone knows, everyone at the gate, and at the gate means everyone. It could also be saying, and the most important people, the judges, right, who sit at the gate, they all know that you're amazing. So everyone knows you're amazing. You have gained this status as it were on your own. And we see in the next chapter that's not completely true, right? She hasn't, people haven't forgotten that she's a Moabite, right? It's not, but there absolutely are seeds planted, particularly in this chapter, that, she doesn't need to marry Boaz to be completely part. And in the next chapter too, what people say when she marries him, right, is like, now she's going to be one of the builders of Israel, right? She's going to, right? That's the line. They say, let me have it in front of me. You know me with quoting. They say to her, right? They say, right? They say, Yitain Hashem et ha'isha haba'ah al beitecha, may God grant the woman who comes to your home, kirachel u'kileah asher banu shtehem et Beit Yisrael, like Rachel and Leah, who the two of them built the house of Israel, right?
Mhm.
And that seems to be coming from, now obviously she is marrying Boaz, but the idea is this woman, may she be like Rachel and Leah. May she be one of these like kind of, and it really does seem to be setting up the idea that she herself is bringing something, right? And it's not just something that Boaz is granting to her. But we can continue to talk about this. I do think that there are at least seeds being planted that, no, a lot of this is coming, that she did not have to marry him. She could have married others and still had this status of being a part of, not just a part of Israel, but someone who was really respected. So, but we can continue to discuss this. Yes.
Okay, I just like the fact that they both, I mean, Chazal say that Boaz had been married and his wife had died, but and had no children. Their experiences match each other when they come together. Is that they've both been married, there's no children. They're both knowledgeable and have had their pains and sorrows, whatever it is. And that's like another reason why they make a good pair.
Yeah, in the Midrash, but then in the Midrash, he also dies right away. So like,
I don't like that part, but
I don't like that part either. I'm like, why? Come on.
no, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so
does Boaz die right away in the Midrash?
In the Midrash, yeah. I mean, the way I always like, you're talking to someone who like you grow up with certain Midrashim which are considered like those are the facts, right? And the facts were like he had a wedding night and then he dropped dead, right? Like that was, so that's pretty awful. I don't like to read it that way. So thank you everyone for joining me. And I will see you next week for our exciting conclusion. And we'll also talk about the different types of redemption that this isn't, right? And what it could be, what it's probably most connected to biblically.